My boyfriend cheated on me with his roommate, who he swore was like a sister. I woke up in his best friend's bed with his grandmother's ring on my finger. I'd been dating Blake for 2 years and everyone kept telling me I was too good for him, but I thought they were just jealous. Blake was a bartender who played guitar in a cover band on weekends and had this female roommate named Tessa, who he swore was just like a sister to him. She'd walk around their apartment in towels, cook him breakfast in her underwear, and sit on his lap during movie nights. But Blake said I was being insecure and crazy for thinking it was weird. He'd cancel our dates if Tessa had a bad day at work. He'd leave my place in the middle of the night because Tessa needed someone to talk to about her ex. When I got promoted at my accounting firm, Blake forgot to congratulate me because Tessa had gotten a parking ticket and was upset. But I loved him and thought relationships took work and compromise. His best friend Danny kept trying to tell me Blake wasn't worth it. Danny owned a small construction company and would always show up when Blake left me stranded places, like when Blake forgot to pick me up from the airport because Tessa wanted to go shopping, or when Blake ditched me at his band's show because Tessa felt sick and needed care. Danny would appear with coffee and a ride, never saying anything bad about Blake but always asking if I was okay. I told Danny to stop worrying about me because Blake and I were solid. Danny just said he'd be around if I needed anything. Blake started getting weird about Danny, saying he was trying to steal me and that nice guys like Danny were actually the worst, because they pretended to care. I defended Danny, but Blake said I was naive, and Danny definitely wanted to sleep with me. I stopped mentioning when Danny helped me to avoid fights. Last Friday was Blake's band's biggest show yet at this venue downtown. I bought a new outfit and invited my friends to support him. Blake said Tessa would be there too because she was basically their unofficial manager, whatever that meant. I got there early to get a good spot and saw Blake's car already in the lot. I went backstage to wish him luck and found him in the green room with Tessa on top of him, both half-dressed. Blake saw me and actually said it wasn't what it looked like. Tessa smirked and said now I knew why Blake kept her around. Blake tried to explain that Tessa was just helping him relax before the show, and that it meant nothing, and I was overreacting as usual. I left and went straight to the bar across the street. Started taking shots of tequila like they were water because I couldn't believe I'd wasted 2 years on someone who was obviously sleeping with his roommate the entire time. Danny showed up after an hour. He said Blake texted the group chat that I'd gone crazy and stormed off for no reason. Danny knew that wasn't true and came looking for me. I was absolutely destroyed by that point, crying and drunk and saying I was so stupid for not seeing what everyone else saw. Danny tried to get me to eat something, but I kept ordering more drinks. I remember telling Danny he was right about everything, and I should have listened. I remember him trying to get my phone when I wanted to call Blake. I remember throwing up in the parking lot while Danny held my hair. I don't remember anything after that. I woke up in a bed that wasn't mine, wearing a t-shirt that said Henderson Construction, which was Danny's company. Danny was asleep on the floor with a pillow and blanket. There was water, aspirin, and toast on the nightstand. And on my finger was a ring. Not an engagement ring, but Danny's grandmother's class ring. He always wore on his pinky. I sat up confused, and Danny woke up immediately, asking if I needed to throw up again. I asked what happened and why I was wearing his ring. He said I'd been trying to call Blake all night, so he gave me his ring to fidget with instead of my phone, and I refused to give it back. He said I kept saying it was prettier than anything Blake ever gave me, which wasn't hard since Blake never gave me anything. Danny said he slept on the floor after making sure I was okay, and nothing happened between us. He said his sister was in the guest room if I wanted to confirm with her. He'd called her to come over so I wouldn't wake up alone with just him there and get the wrong idea. His sister Lori came in with coffee and confirmed Danny was on the floor all night while she checked on me every hour. She said Danny was worried sick and kept saying he should have told me about Blake sooner. I asked what he meant. Lori said Danny knew Blake was sleeping with Tessa for at least 6 months, but didn't know how to tell me without seeming like he was trying to break us up. Blake called while we were talking. He said I embarrassed him by making a scene at his show, and Tessa was upset that I'd invaded their space. Their space. He said if I apologized to Tessa and accepted their relationship dynamic, we could work things out. I looked at Danny, who was pretending not to listen while making breakfast. I looked at his grandmother's ring still on my finger. I told Danny I needed to call Blake back and break up with him properly. Danny looked at me over the rim of his coffee cup and suggested maybe I should eat something first. He said big decisions needed clear heads and I'd had a rough night. Lori walked in carrying a plate of pancakes and set them down in front of me. She said drunk me had been absolutely hilarious last night. Apparently I kept holding up Danny's ring and announcing to anyone who would listen that it was prettier than anything Blake had ever given me. Which was true since Blake never actually gave me anything in 2 years except excuses and disappointment. Lori said I'd refuse to give the ring back to Danny, clutching it to my chest and saying it was mine now. Danny looked embarrassed and said I could keep it as long as I wanted. I twisted the ring on my finger and realized how much lighter I felt without Blake's constant weight dragging me down. I picked up my phone and listened to Blake's voicemail on speaker. His voice came through angry and sharp. He said I'd embarrassed him at his show last night by making a scene. He said Tessa was really upset that I'd invaded their space like that. Their space. He actually called it their space. Blake said if I apologized to both of them and accepted their relationship dynamic, we could probably work things out. He made it sound like he was doing me a favor, Like I should be grateful he was willing to consider taking me back after I caught him cheating. Danny's jaw tightened as he listened. Lori muttered something under her breath about Blake being delusional. I looked at Danny across the kitchen table and saw him clearly for the first time. He'd been showing up for me for 2 years while Blake couldn't even be bothered to pick me up from the airport. Danny brought me coffee when Blake left me stranded. Danny listened when Blake forgot to congratulate me on my promotion. Danny had been the one actually there while Blake was busy with Tessa. I called Blake back. He answered on the first ring and started talking immediately about how glad he was that I'd come to my senses. I cut him off and told him we were done. I said he could have whatever twisted relationship he wanted with Tessa, because I wasn't interested in being part of it anymore. Blake's voice changed from smug to angry in a second. He said I was overreacting like I always did. He said I knew Tessa was important to him, and that I'd agreed to be understanding about their friendship. I hadn't agreed to anything except being lied to and disrespected for 2 years. Blake kept talking, saying I was throwing away our relationship over nothing. I hung up mid-sentence. Danny was trying not to smile. Lori actually cheered and said she'd been waiting 2 years for me to dump that loser. She high-fived me across the table and said this called for celebration pancakes, which apparently were different from regular pancakes because they tasted like freedom. I realized I still had a key to Blake's apartment and he had one to mine. We needed to exchange belongings and keys before this got messier. Danny offered to go with me to Blake's place so I wouldn't have to face him alone. Lori said she'd go to my apartment in case Blake showed up there trying to get his stuff or cause drama. She said she'd been waiting for an excuse to tell Blake exactly what she thought of him. We finished breakfast and I borrowed some of Lori's clothes since mine from last night smelled like tequila and regret. Danny grabbed his truck keys and we headed out. The drive to Blake's apartment felt different from all the times I'd made this trip before. I wasn't nervous about what mood Blake would be in, or whether Tessa would be there making snide comments. I just wanted to get my things and be done with both of them. We pulled up outside Blake's building and I saw his car in the lot. Danny parked and asked if I wanted him to come up with me. I said yes because I didn't trust Blake not to try manipulating me if I went alone. We walked up to the second floor and I knocked on the door. Tessa answered wearing Blake's shirt and nothing else. She was smirking like she'd won some kind of prize. I handed her Blake's key and asked for my stuff. But Tessa leaned against the doorframe and said Blake had already taken my things to my apartment about an hour ago. She said he figured I'd come crawling back once I calmed down and realized what I was giving up. I asked what exactly I was giving up. Tessa's smirk got wider and she said a guy who knew how to have fun and didn't expect her to be boring and jealous all the time. Danny stepped forward and said we were leaving. Tessa called after us that Blake would be better off without someone as uptight as me anyway. We drove to my apartment and found black trash bags on my doorstep. Blake had dumped my belongings outside like I was garbage he was throwing away. Lori was already there and had started bringing bags inside. She looked furious and said she couldn't believe Blake had the nerve to treat my things this way. We carried everything in and I started going through the bags. My clothes were wrinkled and shoved in without any care. My books had bent covers. My toiletries from his bathroom were thrown in loose without caps, leaking everywhere. I found the 3 things Blake had given me over 2 years. A cheap necklace from a mall kiosk for my birthday. A coffee mug with a stupid joke on it for Christmas. A keychain from some bar his band played at. He'd taken them all back. Danny watched me pull out the items and said quietly that his grandmother's ring was still on my finger. He said I could keep it as long as I wanted. It meant more to me than anything Blake had ever given me anyway. My phone rang and I saw it was Savannah from work. She said she'd heard through friends about what happened at Blake's show last night. She wanted to make sure I was okay. I told her the whole story about finding Blake with Tessa and getting drunk and waking up at Danny's place. Savannah said she'd never liked Blake anyway. She said she always thought I deserved way better than some bartender who couldn't even remember my promotion. She said the whole office had been talking about how Blake didn't show up to the company party I'd invited him to last month because Tessa needed him to help her move furniture. Savannah said everyone thought I was too good for him, but nobody wanted to say anything because I seemed happy. I told her I wasn't happy. I was just used to making excuses for him. Savannah invited me to her place for dinner with some friends from work. She said I needed to be around people who actually appreciated me, instead of sitting around feeling sorry for myself. I agreed and asked what time. She said 6 o'clock, and to bring Danny if he wanted to come. I looked at Danny, who was helping Lori fold my clothes properly and put them away. I asked if he wanted to go to dinner at Savannah's. He said sure, if I wanted him there. We finished organizing my apartment, and Danny drove me to Savannah's place across town. She lived in a nice complex with a pool and actual parking spaces. We walked up to her door and I knocked. Savannah opened it and immediately pulled me into a hug. Then she saw Danny behind me and grabbed his arm, pulling him inside too. She said anyone who treated me this well was absolutely welcome in her home. Inside Savannah's apartment, 4 women from my accounting firm sat around a dining table covered with pizza boxes and wine bottles. Savannah introduced me to Michelle from Accounts Payable, Jenna from Tax Prep, and Kira from HR. Danny stood awkwardly near the door until Savannah grabbed his arm and pulled him to the couch. Michelle immediately launched into a story about her ex who maxed out 3 credit cards buying gifts for his side girlfriend. Jenna topped that with her ex who faked a business trip to Vegas but actually took his coworker to Hawaii. Kira said her ex borrowed her car to help his sick mother, but she found receipts for a hotel room and dinner for 2. Everyone looked at me, and I told them about finding Blake with Tessa in the green room. Michelle slammed her wine glass down and said Blake sounded like trash. Jenna asked how long Tessa had been living with him, and I said 2 years, the entire time we'd been dating. Kira shook her head and said she couldn't believe I put up with that situation for so long. I explained that Blake always made me feel crazy for being bothered by it. Savannah refilled everyone's glasses and said Blake was a classic manipulator who convinced me my normal reactions were overreactions. Danny sat quietly on the couch scrolling through his phone while we talked. Michelle glanced at him and asked if Danny and I were together now. I said no and felt my face get hot. Danny looked up from his phone and also said no. Savannah gave me this look that said she didn't believe either of us. The conversation moved on to other topics, but I kept noticing Danny watching me from across the room. The next week, I threw myself into work, staying late to finish reports and avoid going home to my empty apartment. Danny texted me every morning asking if I needed coffee. His sister Lori invited me to her place for dinner twice. Blake's texts started showing up constantly. Long paragraphs about how I ruined his band's biggest opportunity by causing drama before their show. Messages saying Tessa understood him in ways I never did because she actually supported his music career. Rants about how his bandmates were mad at him because venue owners heard about the backstage incident. I deleted each message without responding, but they kept coming. One night, I was at Danny's place helping him pick out new tile for his bathroom remodel, when my phone buzzed with another Blake essay. This one said the band might break up because nobody wanted to work with him anymore, and it was all my fault for making a scene. Danny saw my face and asked what was wrong. I showed him the message and he read it with his jaw clenched. He asked if I wanted him to talk to Blake, but I said no. Danny said Blake had no right to blame me for consequences of his own actions. I agreed, but the messages still bothered me. 3 days later, Blake sent a text saying he might consider taking me back if I posted an apology on social media. He wanted me to say I overreacted and misunderstood his relationship with Tessa. He said if I did that publicly, his reputation could recover, and we could start fresh. I stared at my phone screen, feeling something shift inside me. Danny was making breakfast in his kitchen, and I walked over to show him. He read it, and his face went red. He asked if I was okay, and I realized I wasn't hurt anymore. Just angry. Really angry that Blake thought he could cheat on me for months and then demand I apologize for catching him. I blocked his number right there while Danny watched. He smiled and said good. I felt lighter than I had in days. Danny called me the next afternoon and asked if I wanted to see his office. He said his business partner would be there and I could meet the guy who put up with him every day. I drove to Henderson Construction on the south side of town. The office was in a small building with trucks parked outside. Danny met me at the door and led me inside to a space with desks, filing cabinets, and construction plans covering the walls. A tall guy with graying hair stood up from one of the desks and shook my hand. Danny introduced him as Jasper, his business partner for 8 years. A woman with short dark hair sat at the other desk, and Danny introduced her as Evelyn, Jasper's wife who handled their bookkeeping. Evelyn stood up and hugged me like we were old friends. She said Danny had talked about me for years, and she was so glad I finally dumped the musician. I laughed nervously, and Danny looked embarrassed. Jasper showed me around the office while explaining their current projects. They had 3 houses under construction, and 2 bathroom remodels starting next month. Evelyn asked if I wanted coffee, and I said yes. She poured 2 cups and told Jasper and Danny to go look at blueprints or something. Evelyn led me to a small break room with a table and chairs. She sat down across from me and said she needed to tell me something. I sipped my coffee and waited. She said Danny had been in love with me since the day Blake introduced us 2 years ago. She said he never said anything because I was with Blake, and Danny didn't want to be that guy who tried to steal his friend's girlfriend. She said watching me stay with Blake while he treated me badly nearly killed Danny. She said this past week with me around the office and at his house was the happiest she'd seen Danny in 2 years. I sat there holding my coffee cup and didn't know what to say. Evelyn patted my hand and said she just wanted me to know, because life was too short to waste time not knowing how people really felt. She stood up and went back to her desk like she hadn't just turned my entire world sideways. I started noticing things about Danny I'd somehow missed before. How he always brought me coffee exactly the way I liked it without asking. How he remembered details about my work projects and asked about them days later. How he actually listened when I talked about spreadsheets and tax codes instead of his eyes glazing over like Blake's always did. These weren't new things. Danny had been doing them for 2 years. I was just too focused on making things work with Blake to see what was right in front of me. I caught myself watching Danny while he worked on his laptop at the coffee shop near my apartment. He looked up and smiled, and I felt something warm spread through my chest. This was different from anything I felt with Blake. This felt steady and real and safe. 2 weeks after leaving Blake, I ran into his bandmate at the grocery store, the drummer whose name I could never remember. He stopped his cart next to mine in the produce section and said he was sorry about what happened. He said the whole band knew about Blake and Tessa. He said they all felt bad watching Blake treat me like garbage, but nobody knew how to tell me. He said they were actually relieved I was gone because Blake had been impossible to work with lately. He kept canceling practices to hang out with Tessa and showing up late to gigs. The drummer said half the band wanted to kick Blake out, but they'd been playing together for 5 years and it was complicated. I thanked him for apologizing and started to push my cart away. The drummer stopped me and said I should know Blake was telling everyone a different story. He said Blake claimed I cheated on him with Danny, and that's why we broke up. He said Blake was painting himself as the victim who got betrayed by his girlfriend and best friend. I felt my hands grip the cart handle so hard my knuckles turned white. The drummer said not to worry because nobody believed Blake's version anyway. Everyone knew Blake was full of it. But I was still furious that Blake was rewriting history to make himself look better. I thanked the drummer again and finished my shopping in a rage. That night, I sat on my couch staring at my phone. I opened social media and typed out a simple statement. Blake and I broke up because he was unfaithful, and I'm moving forward with my life. I hit post before I could second-guess myself. Within an hour, 3 of Blake's friends sent me private messages. One said he walked in on Blake and Tessa making out at a party 6 months ago. Another said she saw them leaving a hotel together last summer. The third said Blake brought Tessa to his birthday dinner and introduced her as his girlfriend while I was out of town for work. All 3 said they would back up my story if I needed them to. I screenshotted the messages and saved them just in case. My phone rang from a number I didn't recognize. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. Blake's voice came through screaming that I was ruining his reputation. He said Tessa was really upset about people judging them. He said I had no right to post about our private business on social media. I let him yell for a minute, then cut him off. I said he ruined his own reputation by cheating and lying about it. I said if Tessa was upset, she should have thought about that before sleeping with someone else's boyfriend. Blake started to argue, but I hung up and blocked that number too. My hands were shaking, but I felt good. Really good. Like I'd finally taken back some control over my own story. A month passed. Danny called and asked if I wanted to get dinner at this Italian place downtown. He said it was to celebrate 1 month since I left Blake, which seemed like a weird thing to celebrate, but also kind of sweet. I put on a dress and actually felt excited about going out, which hadn't happened in forever. Danny picked me up right on time, which was still new enough to surprise me. We got a table by the window and ordered wine. Danny kept fidgeting with his napkin, folding it and unfolding it while we looked at the menus. I asked if he was okay, and he said he was just nervous. I asked why he'd be nervous around me after spending basically every day together for a month. He took a breath and said, Evelyn told him she talked to me about his feelings. My stomach did this little flip. I put down my menu and looked at him. I said I'd been thinking about what Evelyn said a lot. I told him I realized he'd been the best part of my life for 2 years. He showed up for every important moment while Blake couldn't even remember my promotion. He drove me to the airport at 5 in the morning when I had business trips. He brought me soup when I was sick. He listened to me complain about difficult clients at work, and actually remembered their names when I mentioned them weeks later. I said I'd been an idiot not to see what was right in front of me this whole time. Danny reached across the table and took my hand. I noticed I was still wearing his grandmother's ring. It had become such a part of me that I forgot it was there most of the time. Danny looked at the ring and then at me. He said he gave me that ring because even drunk me knew I deserved something beautiful. He said he'd wanted to give me everything for so long but didn't know how to tell me without ruining our friendship or making things weird. He said watching me with Blake was torture, but he stayed close because he couldn't stand the thought of not being in my life at all. I squeezed his hand and told him I wanted to try this. Really try. He smiled bigger than I'd ever seen him smile. We finished dinner and he drove me home and kissed me goodnight at my door. It was different from kissing Blake. It felt safe and exciting at the same time. We started dating officially after that. It was completely different from being with Blake. Danny showed up when he said he would. If we made plans for 7, he was there at 7, not 9:30 with some excuse about band practice running late. He remembered things I told him, like how I mentioned loving this specific coffee shop across town, and he surprised me by taking me there on a Saturday morning. He treated me like I mattered. He asked about my day and actually listened to the answer. He met my friends and made an effort to remember their names and jobs. When I had a big presentation at work, he sent flowers to my office. Blake never sent me flowers once in 2 years. Savannah and my work friends loved Danny. They kept saying they knew this would happen. Savannah said she called it the night of her dinner party when she saw how Danny looked at me. My other coworker said anyone with eyes could see Danny was crazy about me, and Blake was an idiot. I invited Danny to Sunday dinner at my parents' house. My mom loved him immediately. She kept saying how polite he was, and how he actually helped clear the table without being asked. My dad talked to him about construction and business stuff. After dinner, my mom pulled me aside in the kitchen. She said this is what a real partner looks like. Someone who shows up and treats you with respect. She said she was sorry she didn't say something about Blake sooner, but she didn't want to push me away by criticizing my choices. I hugged her and told her I got there eventually. 3 months after Blake, I was genuinely happy for the first time in years. Danny and I planned a weekend trip to this cabin in the mountains. I realized while we were looking at places online that I never did anything like this with Blake. Every time I suggested a trip, Blake had band practice or Tessa needed help moving furniture or some other excuse. Danny and I actually booked the cabin and made real plans. We were going in 2 weeks and I was counting down the days. I saw on social media that Blake's band was playing at a bar across town. Danny noticed me looking at my phone and asked if I wanted to go prove I was over it. I looked up at him and said I didn't need to prove anything. I genuinely didn't care what Blake was doing anymore. I didn't wonder if he was thinking about me or if he regretted losing me. I didn't check his social media to see what he was posting. I was just done. Danny smiled and said that's when he knew I was really free. We were at his place one night watching some action movie on his couch. I had my feet tucked under me and his arm around my shoulders. The movie ended and we just sat there in the quiet. Danny turned to me and said he wanted to take his grandmother's ring to a jeweler and have it properly sized for me. I looked down at the ring on my finger. It was still too big, and I had to wear it on my middle finger to keep it from falling off. Then I looked back at Danny and realized he wasn't just talking about the class ring anymore. My heart started beating faster. He said he knew it was fast, but he'd loved me for 2 years already. He said when you know someone is right, you just know. I said yes before he even finished asking. Because sometimes the right person was there all along and you just needed to wake up and see it.